Exodus 1. Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, and Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful, and increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty. And the land was filled with them. Now there arose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. And he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come on, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that, when there falleth out any war, they join also unto our enemies, and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore they did set over them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor. And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick, and in all manner of service in the field. All their service, wherein they made them serve, was with rigor. And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Pure. And he said, When ye do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, Why have ye done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively. And are delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied, and waxed very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, Every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive.
Textual commentary of Exodus 1. We will call this Israel's affliction in Egypt. In verses 1 through 6, from the King James Version. Now these are the names of the children of Israel, which came into Egypt. Every man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. And all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls. For Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. In the above verses, we see the 12 sons of Jacob who came into Egypt. Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. The first verses of Exodus reach back some 430 years. The story of the Exodus begins where the story of Genesis ends. A large family with a crucial place in God's plan of the ages, and their migration to Egypt. The Hebrew title for the book of Exodus is taken from its first words, and these are the names of. In the original language, the first word of Exodus is, and marking its continuity from the Genesis account. And Joseph died. Joseph was the remarkable great-grandson of Abraham, who saved Egypt and the world from terrible famine because he listened to God's voice speaking through Pharaoh's dream. Because of his wisdom and administration, he was lifted to high and honored office in Egypt. Yet eventually, Joseph died, and the status his family enjoyed died with him. In verse 7, we see God's plan of the rapid multiplication of the children of Israel in Egypt. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. In the textual commentary, we see the land was filled with them. Genesis 47:27 says, "So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly." They did indeed multiply exceedingly over the generations, so that the land was filled with them. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly. This family started with 5 people back in Haran: Jacob, Rachel, Leah, Zilpah, and Bilhah. Blessed by God, the family of Israel grew rapidly in their years in Egypt. In verses 8 through 11, we read the following verses. Afraid of their growing presence, the Egyptians oppressed the Israelites. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen, in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. The ancient Egyptians were famous or infamous for their proud sense of racial superiority towards all other people. It isn't surprising to see them afraid and discriminating against this strong minority group in their midst, which looked as if it would not be a minority very long. In the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us. At the time, the Egyptians feared invasion from the Hittites of the north. If the Hebrews among them joined with the Hittites, it posed a significant threat to their security. They set taskmasters over them. They built for Pharaoh supply cities. When the children of Israel were set to slave labor, they built many of the great cities and monuments in Egypt. Though not the pyramids, which were built much earlier, since we don't know exactly when this forced labor began. We don't know how long it lasted. Some estimate the slavery lasted 284 years, others 134 years. There is a famous wall painting on an ancient tomb from Thebes, Egypt, modern Luxor. The tomb of the overseer of brickmaking slaves during the reign of Thutmose, Roman III. The painting shows such overseers armed with heavy whips. Their rank is denoted by the long staff held in their hands and the Egyptian hieroglyphic determinative of the head and neck of a giraffe. In verses 12 through 14, Israel prospers and grows despite the hard bondage of the Egyptians. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage. In mortar, in brick, and in all manner of service in the field, all their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. We see God's plan here as the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. This was God's purpose for Israel's time in Egypt. Egypt served as a mother's womb for Israel, a place where they rapidly grew from a large clan to a mighty nation. We see in Scripture that God's cup was full of rage against Canaan, the land God's people would eventually settle in. God had given the land of Canaan 400+ years to repent for their evil ways. This was God's plan to bring the Hebrews into the promised land. The nation could not grow this way in Canaan, because it was practically impossible to avoid intermarriage with the pagan and wicked inhabitants of Canaan. Egypt was so racially biased and had such an entrenched system of racial separation that Israel could grow there over several centuries without being assimilated. This growth in the face of affliction has consistently been the story of God's people. Throughout all ages, the more they are afflicted, the more they grow. Suffering and persecution are like a great wave that comes upon a ship and looks as if it will destroy it. But the ship catches the wave and just uses it to speed along. They made their lives bitter with hard bondage, because God's purpose was to bless Israel and fulfill His role for them in His eternal plan. No amount of affliction could defeat His purpose. The Egyptians tried their best through cruel slavery, but it did not work. The principle of Isaiah 54:17 proved true. No weapon formed against you shall prosper. The wickedness of the Egyptians could hurt the children of Israel, but could never defeat God's plan for them. Pharaoh thought it best to not kill them, but he did want them to be slaves, to be broken under the yoke of his work assigned to them. In the midst of their cruel and harsh service, life must have seemed hopeless to the children of Israel, and the idea that God was working out His plan must have seemed very far away, yet it was true nonetheless. The Hebrew midwives obey God. In verses 15 through 16, the king of Egypt tries to destroy Israel by ordering the death of all male babies. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah and the name of the other Puah. And he said, "When you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live." Of whom the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. We shouldn't expect that these two women were the only midwives for all the children of Israel. They were probably the leaders of some association of midwives. If it is a son, then you shall kill him. The king of Egypt commanded them to kill all the male babies, to utterly weaken and practically destroy the people of Israel within a generation. We may see the command of Pharaoh with his ancient, final solution, as consistent with Satan's plan of Jew hatred through the centuries. As an attack against God's Messiah, an ultimate plan for Israel in His plan of redemption. Satan knew that the Messiah, the seed of the woman, the one who would crush his head, as foretold in Genesis 3:15, would come from the children of Israel. Therefore, he tried to destroy the whole nation in one generation by ordering all the male children killed. We see in verse 17 that the midwives bravely obey God rather than men. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. But the midwives feared God They probably feared Pharaoh and his power, but they feared God more. For them, the choice was clear. The civil government commanded something that was clearly against God's command. The midwives did the only right thing. They obeyed God rather than men, saved the male children alive. They acted on the same principle as did the persecuted apostles in Acts 4:19. When Peter asked the civil authorities whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you judge. Though generally we are called to obey the government and honor civic rulers, Romans 13:1-5, we are never called to put government in the place of God. Therefore, if the government tells us to do something against God's will, we are to obey God first. In verses 18-22, we see that our God blesses the efforts of the midwives. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing, and saved the male children alive?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. For they are lively, and give birth before the midwives come to them. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives. And the people multiplied and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women." Many people assume that the Hebrew midwives lied to Pharaoh when they said this. Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, even if the midwives deceived Pharaoh. That was not what God blessed. He blessed their godly bravery in obeying God before man. The people multiplied and grew very mightily. The worse the persecution against God's plan to multiply the children of Israel in Egypt, the more God made sure the plan succeeded. This is a wonderful example of the goodness and the power of God. Pharaoh said, "Less," and God said, "More." Pharaoh said, "Stop," and God said, "Go." Romans 2. God obviously won this battle, but he won his victory through some courageous individuals who were willing to stand up to the power of Pharaoh and do what was right. He provided households for them. This was God's blessing on the midwives. He enabled them to have children of their own. Usually, midwives held their occupation because they had no children of their own. "Every son who is born you shall cast into the river." Seeing that his plan did not work, Pharaoh made a far more radical command that all male children should be killed. The method Pharaoh commanded for the death of the male children of Israel became the divine provision for training the deliverer of Israel.